Amazing. Good for you. The interviewer's tone was so patronizing, I was surprised they aired it. She hesitated before continuing to allow the dramatic pause to develop. But let me ask you something, if I may. Sure. You require around-the-clock care. Isn't that correct? I mean, compared to what the doctor said your life would be like, you have come a long way. But even still, you require almost constant care to survive. You cannot bathe, eat, or dress without assistance. That is correct. You have defied the odds. The doctor said you would not live past infancy, but thanks to your parents' efforts, here you are today, a 20-year-old woman and a college graduate. Yes, your parents are older now. I know this is hard for you to consider, but what happens to you when they are no longer able to care for you? What then? What happens to you? Well, at that point, society needs to step up and take responsibility for me. When I was born, the doctors wanted to just let me die. They wanted to put me down like an unwanted animal, but I am not an animal. I am a person and I deserve to live. Now, I will concede that not everyone is out there gaming the system. There are people who legitimately need help. As part of a civilized society, we accept that a subset of the population will need some kind of assistance. The problem is, at least how I see it, is there's a growing portion of the population who believe that they have a right to be happy, a right to benefits that others enjoy, even if they did not contribute to the creation of the benefits themselves. This is where my mind was that night. I had been practicing law for too long, or at least it felt that way. Or maybe the real issue was the type of law I was practicing. Slip and fall cases seemed to involve a certain subset of the population that, well, let's just say that the plaintiff I met that day was the norm rather than the exception. It disturbed me that these people seemed to be getting over on the system that I was part of, a system that I was contributing to with my sweat and my blood. Honestly, life had been good to me. Or, more accurately, us. I mean my family and me. I think maybe I was just bored. I had reached a point in my life in which I could feel that I was no longer moving up, but rather simply digging in. There was no more dream or light at the end of the tunnel to shoot for. It had been replaced by a realization that some dreams are now impossibly out of reach. Maybe I had made some wrong turns along the way, and now I was facing a dead end, rather than an open thoroughfare. When you are young, people tell you you can be anything. You can do anything. Still early on, the list of what you can be and do begins to shrink. You may have bad eyes, so you will never be an astronaut. You are genetically predetermined to be a below average height, so your dreams of basketball glory are likewise reduced to almost nothing. This is all fine and well when you're still in school. There are plenty of other options and opportunities to be had, most of which you're not even aware of yet. By the end of high school, your performance to that point further limits your options. The Ivy League school is now out of reach, and you need to settle for your third or fourth choice. You cannot afford to live on campus, and your major was full, or it wasn't what you thought it would be. Life continues on, and choice after choice is laid before you. Do I party tonight or study? Do I stay at this job or look elsewhere? Do I exercise today or not? With each decision you make, doors close behind you. When you are young, it seems that for every door that closes, almost immediately, many more open. As you get older, the balance shifts. You find fewer and fewer doors opening up. Sometimes you make a choice and have to wait, sometimes for long periods, before another will open. As I sat there that night at the ladies', I was feeling like I had been sitting, waiting for the next door to open, but nothing was happening. Work, life had become a grind rather than a ride. My beer finally arrived. The bartender had snuck up behind me while I was looking about the room. I slid a bill across the bar and inadvertently pushed it through a puddle of condensation on the bar. Wet bills must be a common occupational hazard, as he did not react when his hand touched the soggy currency. He simply scooped it up and moved away to the register to ring it up. I was left looking at myself in the mirror behind the bar. I raised the mug to my lips to drink while simultaneously scanning the scene behind me by way of the mirror that was sitting behind the bar. So much activity, so many people, all animated, all seemingly unaware and indifferent to my observation of them. In that moment, the scene reflected in the mirror reminded me of the ocean or a wooded field affected by the wind. Let me explain. Everything was in motion. Or more accurately, everyone was in motion. Everyone I could see was doing something. Some were talking and gesturing, others drinking, and still others actively listening. There were waiters moving to and fro, as were patrons moving from table to table. There was even a woman on one of the payphones having a very animated conversation. She was trying to get someone to come and pick her up as she felt that she was unable to drive in her current state of inebriation. What was funny about her was that she was clearly not a local. By her accent, I believed that she was originally from Eastern Europe. From what I could hear of her conversation, so was the person on the other end of the phone. As she spoke, she switched back and forth between what I assume was her native tongue and English. It was quite impressive, really. She was using the phone, the wall, and a nearby booth to stand, but effortlessly moved between the two languages as she tried to persuade the person on the phone to come and pick her up. Going back to my analogy of the wooded field and the ocean, when you see a scene like this, where everything is doing something, your brain tends to notice the one thing that is out of place. For instance, in a field of high grass swaying in the breeze, your eye is drawn to the one blade that is not moving, or moving the wrong way against the breeze. When you watch the sea, you notice that one white cap, it draws your attention. Your mind is drawn to that piece that is out of place. That night, while I looked into the mirror behind the bar at the ladies, what caught my attention was the one person, other than the bartender, who seemed to be aware of me. That was why I had noticed her. She was sitting in a booth behind me and to my left. Of course, in the mirror, it looked like she was over my right shoulder. To say she was sitting in a booth is not entirely accurate. She was sitting on the bench of the booth, and by all rights, if she had been sitting at the booth, her back, or at least her right shoulder, would have been facing me. However, she was turned toward me and the aisle between the wall of booths and the bar area. There was a striking beauty about her. She had a small round face, sharp features, and dark, almost black eyes. Her hair was up, but appeared to be relatively long and of a deep, dark chestnut color. Her clothes were unremarkable. I believe she was wearing a light earth-colored sweater and jeans, maybe a pair of short boots with a heel. Her stance was somewhat strange. As I said, she was sitting at a booth, but turned away and toward the bar. Her right arm was draped over the back of her booth, very nearly touching the back of the head of the guy seated in the next booth. Her left arm was lying across her table, her hand closed around the handle of a half-full beer mug. The look on her face was one of mild annoyance. Her companions, or at least I assumed she was with them, as she was sitting with them, seemed unaware that her attention was elsewhere. It was at that point that I realized she was looking back at me through the mirror. I had also become acutely aware of the fact that I had been staring, and I had gotten caught. I put down my beer and pretended to stare into it, hoping that she did not know that I had been looking as long as I had. A few moments went by. I wondered if she was still looking, with that annoyed look on her face. She looked young, and I assumed that she was probably there with her very large boyfriend. I thought to myself that she was probably telling him about the creepy old guy at the bar ogling her. I imagined that at that moment he was probably pushing his way out of the booth to come and confront me. I was sure that I was about to get my ass kicked. I wanted to look to see if he was coming, but in the same token, I didn't want to look in case she was still looking at me. I reasoned that maybe she wasn't entirely sure that I was a creepy old guy ogling her from the bar, but if I looked again, it would confirm her suspicions, and her boyfriend would kick my ass. I fought the urge to look in the mirror again, or over my shoulder, in her direction. As I did so, my mind went through the other possibilities. Maybe I had caught her staring. I was not so bad looking for an older man, and she was not that much younger. Maybe that was it. Her boyfriend was not coming for me because she did not have one. Or maybe he was not there because she can't stand him. The more I thought along those lines, the more it made sense. I began to convince myself that I had no reason to be embarrassed. Maybe she should be the one embarrassed. My confidence grew and I raised my head, not enough to see into the mirror, but I was thinking about it. I did nothing wrong. In fact, if she had caught me staring, then maybe she should have been flattered. Yeah, that was it, flattered. I straightened up and resolved to try and steal another peek in her direction. I figured I would use the mirror again and tried to hide that I was looking by using the bottles lined up in front of the mirror. I thought to myself, if only I could see if she was still there. I tried to turn my head and look into the mirror out of the corner of my eye, trying to bring her booth into my field of vision, but avoid making eye contact if I found her there. A quick look led me to believe that someone was still there, but I was not sure it was her. Really, all I could see was a leg, and I wasn't sure it belonged to her. She was wearing jeans, as was the leg, I could see, but I did not get a good enough look before to be able to confirm that this leg belonged to that woman. Enough time had passed. She could have moved. In fact, the way she was sitting before made it appear as though she was considering leaving the booth. Maybe she had, and I was looking at someone else. I couldn't be sure. Maybe if I turned ever so slightly. I had been so wrapped up in my social anxieties that I had almost forgotten that I was sitting in a room full of people in a public place. If anyone had been watching me go through all of this, they would have thought that I was in fact the creepy old guy at the bar that I was trying so hard to avoid being. If they could have heard my thoughts, they would have known they were right. However, it was in the midst of this socially retarded exercise that I heard a distinctly feminine voice. It was clear, articulate, breathy, and close. In a room full of people, sounds and voices, this one sounded as though the speaker's lips were close enough to brush my earlobe. 2 syllables, slowly and purposefully enunciated so as to ensure they were heard correctly. 2 syllables, but 1 word. A single word. A name. In fact, the speaker said them so startlingly slowly and purposefully that I started to react even before they had finished. The voice startled me so profoundly that I literally jumped off my chair, turning as I did to face the speaker. Equally disturbing was the name itself. It was a name I had not heard in a very long time. I had until that moment forgotten about. In fact, the only time I had ever heard that name before was decades before, and I was the one who had uttered it. I spun completely around and found myself facing the booth behind me. No one was close enough to have whispered into my ear and to have startled me so. Next to me at the bar was another businessman. He saw me jump. "You okay, bud?" "Yeah, sorry, I slid off my stool." I lied, but it seemed the only plausible explanation that did not make me seem like a complete crazy person. I sat back down and the bartender started looking my way a little concerned, like maybe he shouldn't have served me. I could feel others looking my way as well. I must have made more of a commotion than I had thought. Since I was rapidly becoming the center of attention, I decided that there was no harm in looking. The woman was no longer in the booth behind me. More than a little embarrassed, I headed for the door. I went home that night after the ladies, a little confused. Had I really heard that voice? Did it really say what I thought it did? Did I imagine it? Maybe I had heard something, and my mind did the rest. Maybe I was working too hard. Maybe I should have finished my drink. By the time I had gotten home that night, I had all but dismissed the incident. The ladies was always loud. I probably just misheard something, and my mind tried to make it familiar. When I arrived at home, I found my wife and children waiting for Dad so that they could eat dinner. All was as it should have been. We sat and ate, and the events of the day, including what happened at the ladies, melted away.